Okay, well, we got through page 132 in your textbook yesterday. Open your textbook again, your social studies book, to page 133. Today we're going to read something that our story was about last week in ELA. Do you remember what it was? The Battle of the Alamo? Yep, so that battle happens in the war with Mexico. If you remember a lot about the story, we've learned a lot about that war already. And so let's connect it to yesterday's lesson. So yesterday we talked about all these different trails that went out west, and we ended with the thought that people believed in manifest destiny, that all of this land should belong to the United States, and if we needed to take it away from another country, we should, so that our country could go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And we ended with these questions: should we try to expand our borders, and should we take this land that's close to us, away from Mexico? And how is this going to happen? And what about people who are already living there? Do they become United States citizens, or do they have to leave and go somewhere else? So there were a lot of questions. And then comes the election of 1844. And that's where we're going to start today. And we're going to talk about another president, the last president who's been from Tennessee, James K. Polk. I'm sorry, we're going to get to Andrew Johnson later. We've only done Andrew Jackson so far. Second president is James K. Polk. We'll get to Andrew Johnson later. James K. Polk is elected 1844. He's got some answers to these questions. As a matter of fact, I don't know, other than Thomas Jefferson, who bought all of Louisiana, I don't know if any other president gained more land for the United States than this president from Tennessee, James K. Polk. So let's read and find out what all lands he got for the United States. The election of 1844. Manifest destiny was just one of the issues Americans were thinking about as the 1844 presidential campaign began. The Democratic Party met to choose a candidate for president. Andrew Jackson told the Democrats they needed someone from the West, but they had a hard time choosing a candidate. After voting several times, they finally settled on James K. Polk of Tennessee. Polk ran against two other candidates. If elected, Polk promised voters he would fulfill the nation's manifest destiny. One step to achieving this destiny would be to make Texas a state. Texas had won its independence from Mexico in 1836, but it was not yet a state. So let's read and see how Texas becomes a state. The Mexican War. Soon after Polk became president, the United States annexed Texas. To annex means to add an area or a region to a country. Then the United States and Mexico began arguing about where the Texas border should be. President Polk sent an official of the U.S. government to Mexico to try to work out a solution. He wanted to see if the Mexicans would be willing to sell land to the United States as a way to fix the problem. But Mexican officials refused to meet with the American official. So try to do it peacefully. James K. Polk sent somebody from the government to Mexico, said, hey, we don't want to fight over this land. We want to buy this land from you, and so it can become part of the United States. And they said, we're not meeting with you. They didn't want to meet with this official and do it peacefully. So the president also sent U.S. soldiers to the border area, and Mexico leaders did the same. When fighting broke out, the president asked Congress to declare war on Mexico. So there was a dispute or an argument about where is the correct border between the United States and Mexico. How far up does Mexico's land go, and how far down does the United States land go? They didn't agree, so they're going to fight about it. Okay, so let's see what happens. 134. We'll read about him in just a minute, but let's read this right here. Mexico cedes nearly half its land. After 2 years of fighting, the Mexican War came to an end. The United States had won the war. Didn't talk much about the war, did it? I wish it gave some more details. We'll go back and read more about it later. In the treaty that ended the war, Mexico agreed to give all claims to Texas. Mexican officials also agreed to cede all of Mexico's land between Texas and the Pacific Ocean. To cede means to give control of something to one person, group, or country. Manifest destiny had been achieved through the war with Mexico. In the years to follow, the states of California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and Utah would be carved out of the land gained through the Mexican War. Mexico lost nearly half of its land during the war. Let's go back and look at that map. So we look, here is Mexico, the brown part. All right. Before the war, the purple part and the dark green part was part of Mexico. So Mexico was all the way up here. But we tried to buy it. They didn't want to meet and sell it. So after the war, after the United States beat Mexico in the war, we got all this land. It became part of the United States. And that's where all those states we just read became part of. So California, all of Texas, other states through here became part of the United States lands now. So that's all the land that James K. Polk got for the United States during the war. So let's read what he says here. Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, that has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon the American soil. Mexico has proclaimed that fighting has begun and that the two nations are at war. So we went to war with them and, well, we beat them and got the land. Here's a picture of James K. Polk. Let's read about him. James K. Polk was born in North Carolina and moved to Tennessee with his family as a young man. He attended the University of North Carolina and then returned to Nashville. He eventually became involved in politics. After serving in the state General Assembly, okay, excuse me for that. I'm recording this on our first week back from Christmas break, and I'm finding out that lots of people are going to be joining our virtual class, so I might get phone calls while I'm recording. If it does, I'll apologize for that. But it makes me lose my train of thought, but I've got to answer the phone when somebody calls. So anyway, so let's get back to this. So we just talked about how James K. Polk got land from Mexico for the United States, and we were reading about him. I'm going to start reading right here. After serving in the State General Assembly, Polk won a seat in the U.S. Congress. Then Polk became Speaker of the House under President Jackson. The Speaker of the House leads the House of Representatives. The two men worked so closely that people began calling Polk Young Hickory. We read about that earlier, if you remember. In 1844, the Democrats chose Polk to run for president. Many people outside of Tennessee had never heard of Polk. He was considered a dark horse candidate because people thought he could not win the election. In a horse race, the dark horse is expected to lose, but the dark horse sometimes comes from behind the wind, and that is exactly what happened. Polk won the election and served one term as president from 1845 to 1849. Polk is credited with achieving the nation's manifest destiny. He used treaties and war to acquire land that eventually became the United States, became the states of Texas, Oregon, Washington, California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado. And after his term ended, Polk returned to Tennessee. Only 3 months after he left the White House, he died of a disease called cholera. Well, so James K. Polk, the Mexican War. We're going to do some more reading about this week. The book didn't have a whole lot of details about the war with Mexico. And of course, we learned about it last week, about the Alamo battle. But we're going to learn more about it, read some more about it this week. So that finishes our book lesson for today. The rest of the week, I'm going to have some little text for you to read that goes back over these 2 lessons we've done. You will have 5 questions from today's lesson to answer today. They'll be very simple as long as you listen to the lesson, okay? So go get them done, and we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll learn some more history. See you then.